Bridget, you have a podcast. There Are No Girls on the Internet. And you had a mini series off of There Are No Girls on the Internet called Disinformed. Obviously, when you say there are no girls on the internet, what did you mean by that title? Like, briefly, if you can explain that. I'm sure many people are like, what do you mean? I follow girls all the time. I pay them and they show me parts of their body. Anyway, they show me their feet. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the name There Are No Girls on the Internet kind of is almost like an inside joke with myself. It has many kind of connotations, but one of the ones I was most kind of driven by was this idea that when you're on the internet, everybody assumes that everybody on the internet is like a white, straight dude, right? Like that's the default assumption. I have been guilty of that assumption myself, and I'm chatting with someone online. And I wanted to kind of pay homage to the fact that there are so many amazing marginalized people creating cool things on the internet, shaping the world using the internet, having really important conversations about what it means to our culture to be online, yet are not always spotlighted. And so when I say there are no girls on the internet, because I so often hear there aren't that many women online, there aren't that many women in tech, I wanted to create a space where it's like, oh, here we are doing awesome stuff and having cool conversations.
Yeah. Hey, right here. I just feel like I think women and people of color need to lean in when it comes to trolling more. Like we need to be as awful as what I assume most like cis straight white men are online.
Yes, we could team up. We could do like a tag team.
Mm-hmm. Just get better at the random like but you've talked a lot about.
I just want to say I've done my research. Now you do yours.
What, just living your life, James?
Right.
No, exactly. If you, if you had something to say, you should comment. No, but I do think that's true. Like, I do think that, commenters are not, like, women aren't always encouraged to comment. I think you have to create a good space for that. And like bounce people who are ridiculous. Also, shout out to all of the mods out there. But you have done also work on misinformation, disinformation, and we had Anita Sarkeesian on the show, who was in the crosshairs of the Gamergate crap. And, years before Donald Trump was elected, years before January 6th, and the idea that like, oh man, the QAnon stuff actually did bear fruit. Look at it. It's an insurrection. I think women and people of color have been on the front lines of this call that there is a lot of hate and there is a lot of real unchecked violence that is happening. And I know you like can you tell me more about that? And also, have they been getting the shine and the credit for kind of blowing the whistle on all this?
Oh, I wish I could say the answer was yes, but the answer is unfortunately no. As you correctly pointed out, women, Black women, feminists, people of color, LGBTQ folks, sex workers, trans folks, anybody who identifies as marginalized online, so many of those folks have been sounding the alarm about the dangers of things like disinformation, misinformation, trolls, bots, online harassment, since way before Donald Trump was ever in the White House. Yet, because we are marginalized, our cries were often ignored. There was a Black woman, Black feminist on Twitter who very early on noticed something weird happening on our Twitter, being like, oh, I think these are like bots pretending to be Black women. I don't know what's going on here. Reported it to Twitter, reported it to everybody. Nothing was ever done. Come to find out that in the 2016 election, a Senate inquiry confirmed that bots pretending to be Black folks were the biggest contributors to sort of destabilizing our election. And if somebody had actually just listened to these women when they spoke up many years ago, what would our world be like now? And so women that you just mentioned, like Anita Sarkeesian, so many people think that like online harassment, online, violence, disinformation, that stuff that stays online. Anita Sarkeesian can tell you better than anybody that stuff, it may start online, but it doesn't just stay online. It very much becomes part of your real everyday world. I feel like we saw that in January 6th as well, where things that happen online for the longest time will be like, oh, just shut your computer, no big deal, whatever. But we know now it has like very real world consequences.
Yeah. And how do you feel about the efforts that big tech is making lately to like rein this in? I'm like, I do think that kicking Trump off of Twitter was a good idea. It's noticeably better. Like there is far less misinformation out there, but once again, it's in the hands of billionaires to make this decision. Like, where do you stand on all that? And what do you feel like we should be, celebrating, but also pushing for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I agree with you. I absolutely think that keeping Trump deplatformed was the very least that these tech platforms could do. We know that deplatforming works, and so when someone repeatedly uses your social media platform to whip up violence, like real world violence, you can't have that. I think that Trump being deplatformed was a good thing. It's important to note that Facebook, the cowards that they are, have only committed to keeping Trump off of their platform until I think 2024, just in time for a re-election season, right? And so we know that for a lot of these tech companies, it's about money. They often act when it's something bad has happened that brings negative PR or negative attention to their platforms, and then they try to scramble and do something after the fact, but 9 times out of 10, it's something that's like far too little, far too late. And so the reality is that hate, division, disinformation, harassment, those things are often baked into the revenue streams of their platforms. And until we really reckon with that reality, that like you are profiting off of hatred and hate speech and violence and disinformation, until we really, really get into what that means, I don't think we're going to be able to solve this. But, if they want to do these little Band-Aid things after the fact, sure, I'll call those like fine, but they're not nearly, what they could be doing to solve this problem that they not just created, but get rich off of.
Yeah. James, what's your response when you hear, like this question of like nationalizing things like Facebook, breaking up big tech? Do you have like a part of you that's like, oh no, what if we, we're going to lead to a big government, big brother type situation?
Definitely. As a comic and blah, blah, blah. But more importantly, as a leftist, because this shit always goes back to censoring and deplatforming leftist causes every time, it seems like, and there's a million stories about that. I think YouTube's almost a bigger problem than anything. And I think that's where most, at least younger people, get radicalized to the right wing stuff. And that algorithm is specifically geared for that. The left is, people like you and, thank God, have come along, but it was like almost an ignored space by the left for about a decade. It seems like almost like AM talk radio. Like the left just kind of like ceded that to the right wing. And it's like, oh shit. 3/4 of the country all think the same thing. And it's like, how did that happen? Well, it happened because we weren't there, but it's also, I do think they need to be regulated because the algorithms are the problem. And just anecdotally, I know that because I got a little into crypto because I'm poor and I wanted to. So I watched a couple crypto videos, and I think Norm Macdonald's funny. So I watched some old Norm clips, and just those two things, my suggestions after all the lefty vids I've watched in my life, my suggestions were all right wing shit. Like immediately. God. Immediately.
Just like pickup artistry and like Crowder videos. Oh my God.
Literally Crowder videos. And I'm like, why? Because I think Norm used to be funny. What the fuck? Like, but that's crazy to me.
No, yeah, that is, yeah. And I think like I'm less afraid of big government control at this point. I think we're so far from like a truly democratic internet, which I think is where we need to be, that I think any small movements to break up big tech are good. And there were some this last week.
100%. I was just talking the other day, like to someone like, remember old Google? Like it was crazy when you could like find stuff that you were looking for before they, like an old article or something, and now it's just, this is what we want you to see.
Hey, thanks so much for watching the Bitchuation Room podcast live stream. And while you're here, why don't you just subscribe to this channel? I promise it'll be good.